Why Dan Hurley is the new face of college basketball. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose, visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Joining me today is Adam Zagoria, a basketball insider and a contributor to a couple of small publications you might know, the New York Times, Forbes Sports, and NJ.com, and his own site, zagsblogs.com. Adam, is Dan Hurley coming off back-to-back national titles the new face of college basketball?
I think the answer has to be yes to that, right, Mark? The guy's he's got 2 rings. He's won 12 straight NCAA tournament games, all by double digits. He's the toast to college basketball. You know, I feel like I've written 10 Dan Hurley stories in the last 2 weeks. I used to cover him when he was at St. Benedict's Prep. I'm probably the only college basketball writer who can say that I was also a St. Benedict's Prep beat writer when Dan was there. And it's obviously exciting for people in New Jersey and Jersey City and the Northeast to see the success of Dan and the Hurley family. And I think, people nationwide are kind of just maybe learning a little more about Dan and the Hurleys.
Yeah, I keep hearing this phrase, Adam, genuine. Whether it's I've interviewed some of the recruits that he's brought in, their parents. You hear it in different cycles. It's kind of the connective tissue from Dan's personality into his staff. Do you get the sense that this is what sets him apart from his contemporaries?
Look, I think there are a lot of great coaches out there and a lot of coaches who identify and bond and recruit well. I mean, Matt Painter's a terrific coach, got to the championship game. There are a lot of terrific coaches out there. I think Dan admits he's a Jersey City guy, and he's his personality, his persona is Jersey City and New Jersey. And that's obviously, rubs some people the wrong way. And if you're not from this part of the world, like I think some of these columnists at the Final Four were, his behavior can be a little off-putting. He's constantly sort of badgering the officials. And, if he's not talking to the officials, he's sending Luke or Kamani over to talk to them. He's pouting and making faces and gestures on the sideline. And I understand that's not everyone's cup of tea, but it was kind of funny to me that some of these reporters and columnists at the Final Four were just shocked at this behavior. I do think he's been able to establish a formula for winning here with, bringing in some guys from the portal that they need, surrounded with key program guys, and obviously one key freshman in Steph. And now they're going to have to go back out in the portal and, replace guys like Cam Spencer and Tristan Newton, who are terrific program guys.
Yeah, no, we'll have a portal. You're teasing my show for tomorrow. We're having a portal conversation with some Rivals guys about maybe some targets for UConn. One thing that I have to ask you, because and this wasn't, you sparked an extra question for me here. His behavior, I'm not young enough, I'm not old enough to have seen Bob Sr. Obviously there's footage of him in his practices, from his high school days. Was he as demonstrative as Dan, or worse when it comes to the officials? Can you kind of shed some light on that? I don't know if this is just who Dan is, or was it a learned behavior? I'm curious.
Yeah, I did cover Bob Sr. I covered a lot of St. Anthony's games. In New Jersey, we had a terrific rivalry, for those who don't know, between St. Anthony's and St. Patrick's. St. Patrick, which was coached by Kevin Boyle, who's now the coach at Montverde Academy in Florida. Bob Sr. sort of wore the white hat in New Jersey, for better or worse, and Kevin Boyle wore the black hat. For my money, Kevin Boyle should be in the Naismith Hall of Fame as well, along with Bob Sr. Guy's an incredible coach, and I think just won his seventh 6th or 7th national championship at Montverde. And they played every year in the New Jersey State tournament. So that was a great rivalry. Bob, when I saw Bob Sr. as a coach, he was an older man in his 60s and 70s. So I would say he was a little more restrained than Danny is. I think Danny's kind of taken it to a new level. I did hear Bob Sr. say some terrific things. One time in the St. Anthony's gym, they were beating somebody up in the state tournament, and the opposing coach was complaining. I don't know. He mentioned something that was going on the St. Anthony's bench with how Bob was interacting with Mike Rosario, one of his players. And Bob Sr. said, go look at the scoreboard. Go look at the scoreboard. And just pretty much, told this guy to go sit down and pipe down. But, Danny's much more animated with his movements and gestures.
For sure. So talk to me about, you've been covering college basketball for a while. What does it mean in the coaching ranks to be a 2-time national champion? And how quickly do you think the love affair with Dan Hurley will last with the media who loves him? I think we already know the columnists who don't, but maybe you can editorialize that kind of 2-part question.
Yeah, I mean, look, I tweeted a list yesterday of Dan Hurley now has twice as many rings as Jim Boeheim, John Calipari, Tom Izzo, Scott Drew, and Tony Bennett. That's a pretty impressive list. A lot of people out there think Tom Izzo, he's got 3 rings. He's got 5 rings. Calipari must have 3 rings. Their guys are great coaches. It's hard to win the NCAA tournament. They each have 1. And Danny now has as many as Jay Wright and Bill Self and, Rick Pitino, if you want to count Rick's 2013 title, which I do. So that's pretty elite company. The next tier is Bob Knight and Roy Williams won 3. Coach K won 5, John Wooden won 10, I think. So, Danny's only 51 years old. He's got a lot of time now to win a 3rd or 4th. If he does that, he's really going to be in some rarefied air. And even if he doesn't, let's say UConn doesn't win a title for the next 5 years, he's always going to be able to walk around and say, hey, I got two rings, 2. Mm-hmm. And again, the only Bill Self and Rick Pitino can say that among active coaches.
For sure. And because this is a UConn podcast, I'd be remiss to not say I have one correction on that. Jim Calhoun also has 3 titles. So
yes, I'm sorry, Jim Calhoun.
No. Listen, I'm saving you. I don't want your mentions to blow up when people are like, "Well, what about Jim Calhoun?" So, listen, that's
that would be pretty crazy. So you've got 2 coaches, one program with 5 plus Kevin Ollie won 1. Obviously, if Danny wins another, you would have a unique situation where 2 guys at one program each won 3 or more.
Would be amazing. Well, we're going to press Adam on some of the media portrayal of Dan Hurley coming up after this. Have you ever had a frustrating time trying to snag tickets for an MLB game? Remember one time I was scrambling to find good seats last minute, but it was a complete nightmare. That's why I'm thrilled to tell you guys about Game Time, the official ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. With Game Time, you're getting tickets is a breeze. Prices drop closer they get it to game time, and they've got killer last-minute deals. Plus, you can check out views from your seats before you buy. Personally, I love it. Their lowest price guarantee ensures you getting the best deal out there. I'm all about those last-minute deals. Flash deals with Game Time. You can save up to 60% off on sports concerts and more. And get this, their all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets and download the Game Time app now. And here's a bonus. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions may apply. So don't miss out. Download the Game Time app today. All right, Adam. So I've read a few columns even after UConn won, and some of the media portrayal of Dan Hurley just blanketed, fair or unfair. Do you feel like part of his behavior it's warranted when people call him out, or just curious, your own personal thoughts?
Look, I mean, you got to call it what it is. He's rubbed some people the wrong way with his sideline behavior. Rick Pitino made a bunch of comments earlier this season that he never works the officials and works the referees. And it was obvious, whether that's true or not, it's obvious that Rick and Danny had a little, rivalry going there, and Rick objected to how Dan behaved on the sidelines. Obviously Rick's the new big dog in the Big East, and he was trying to sort of, make a statement with some of the comments he made about Connecticut and Dan. He called them decent earlier in the year, which, now on April 11th sounds pretty funny to be calling UConn decent. So, and if you're the opposing fan bases, I mean, obviously Dan had, was either taunted or had run-ins at, with the fans at Providence, at Creighton and Butler, chants against him and taunts. So obviously the fans at some of these Big East schools find him an appealing target to kind of, taunt and go after. And, look, he is sort of constantly, being animated, making facial gestures, talking to the officials, doing stuff. But that's him. He's being authentic to himself. He's very passionate about his players and the game. He's super competitive, like all these guys are. I do think if he ever wants to coach in the NBA, there's been some talk maybe down the road he would try to coach the Knicks or something. I don't think you can get away with that type of stuff in the NBA because your players and the officials just won't have that. So
Sure.
I think as he matures as a coach and a person, especially if he wants to coach in the NBA, he's going to have to tone some of that down.
No, it's a fair point. I'm giggling to myself because I know you're in New York City and I hear the sirens coming.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No. It's a great. To me, it's a great. Yeah, no, it's a great segue because I was going to ask you, where do you see the line where, where he teeters on that, but also where does the line in media for kind of like the clutching of pearls, right? The whole idea that, coaching is supposed to be, are we all supposed to be, and I love Matt Painter. I think he's a great coach. Are you all supposed to be Matt Painter-esque, or is there room for people like Dan, has called himself a lunatic?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's room for it, right? Because he's been successful doing it, and he's just won 2 championships. And it kind of harkens back to the old Big East when we had, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, you had all these colorful characters, right? Rolly Massimino, Luke Carnesecca, and John Thompson, and Rick Pitino at Providence, Boeheim. I mean, all these guys were nuts, right, in their own ways. So I think Dan provides a little, excitement, and he's making the rounds this week on Pat McAfee and Colin Cowherd and all these shows. And I think part of the appeal is that he is this real, authentic, Jersey City guy that, it's kind of like Nick Kyrgios in tennis. You're a tennis guy. I'm a tennis guy. Kind of like Nick Kyrgios in tennis, or maybe some pro wrestling a little bit, where, you're bringing a show besides just the X's and O's and the coaching of the game. And, look, the Big East, I don't think gets the national respect and attention from around the country that it deserves, partly because it's got a TV deal with Fox and it's not on ESPN, although Jay Billis and the game day crew did go to UConn this year. But, there's a lot of good coaches in the Big East, but some of them are sort of, bland and not very exciting. And Danny is bringing this extra dynamic that I think draws a lot of people's interests.
Yeah, and in being from Connecticut, not living there now, but understanding kind of the mentality of that region, everything's great right now because he's winning. Do you feel UConn has already reached the point where he's a deity and pretty much anything he does, he can do no wrong in their eyes? Or is there a point where if he did something on court, they wouldn't be able to defend it?
I mean, look, there's always some crazy thing that could happen that you can't foresee, but I don't think, I'm not going to go there and say Dan will do that. Like I said before, he's guy's got 2 rings. So let's say they crash out in the second round and pull a Villanova for the next 2 years. Are fans going to be disappointed and, disheartened? Sure. But they're going to be able to say this guy's got 2 championships, and very few other coaches can say that. I don't know where we're going on the Kentucky thing later, but I have been a little surprised and stunned. We're speaking about fan bases, that some of these Kentucky fans are, really entitled, and just sort of felt that Dan should just pick up and pack his bags and come to Kentucky if they offered more money. And, kind of, if they end up with Scott Drew, some of them will be unhappy. So fan bases can be crazy. That's, fan is short for fanatic, as we know.
No, that's true. And you're a pro, Adam. We're going to segue. But at first, I have to ask you, not specifically you, Adam, but the audience. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel, program free every day to bring you the biggest stories about all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, we're going to talk about the Kentucky job. Adam, maybe not necessarily breaking news, but talking about something he reported earlier this morning, coming up after this. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. An all-in app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Adam, look at you hard at work.
Shooting some text out. Sorry.
No. Listen. When the NFL Network has Adam Schefter on, his phones are right there. I have we have no problem with it whatsoever. Yeah. Here's what I've said, and here's what I've told Husky Nation. Right, Dan Hurley turned down the many jobs in the past. He talked about that, as you mentioned, on Pat McAfee. He even talked about his history on that on Colin Cowherd. So I don't think it's a surprise to you. It definitely wasn't a surprise to me. You spoke to Ray Allen, who said Kentucky needs to have keep their hands off of our guy. What insights can you share from the mini Kentucky courtship?
First of all, I just thought that was a cool scene. I've been on the court the last 2 years when UConn won, and you got all the UConn legends, Ray Allen, Rip Hamilton, all the guys there, and Danny's celebrating with them, and I got a nice picture of them all together with the trophy. So that's cool. It obviously means a lot to those guys. And I spoke to Rip and Ray, and they gush about Dan as a offensive coach and a game planner and a schemer. And also said, Ray Allen told me Kentucky needs to find their own guy, and Danny Hurley's our guy, which I thought was great. I think that I don't know specifically whether Kentucky, made contact with Dan's agent or made an offer. I don't have the specific details on that. There was a report that they were prepared or offered him 10 or 11 million a year. I think it's been reported Dan makes $5 million at Connecticut, plus I think he got 1.8 or something in bonuses. I reported it yesterday. So UConn's gonna, and I also talked to David Benedict on the court, who's pretty much said they'll do whatever it takes to keep him. Now, I don't know all about UConn's athletic budget. I've sort of been told there's a little, they're a little financially strapped, maybe, or a large. Dan and his staff probably make a large segment of the money there. So I don't, I wouldn't imagine Connecticut could go up to 10 million a year for him, but they're probably going to need to make some sort of good faith offer and move him up to whatever, 7 million, 8 million, something like that to respond if he has gotten an offer from Kentucky. I think he's like the 7th highest paid coach, right now. So they're going to have to move him up. Sorry, let me tell this person to stop texting me.
You're fine. Yeah, while you're doing that, I think what I've heard, and this is it basically is confirms what you talked about, is that a couple sources have told me that he did get an offer of 11 million for 6 years. So, maybe a total package of about 80 million, and that they turned it down. And I think it has a lot to do with his wife. Yeah. I think he's been very vocal about Andrea, and she's been vocal. She's gone on other podcasts about how different fan bases, and She's a Jersey girl. Listen, I'm from southeast Connecticut. Lots of Jersey friends, lots of New York City friends. It's a different breed. Men, women, whoever. It's just family's so big up there, and I know moving down south is probably the last thing that she would want to ever do. Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, we talked to Dan, a bunch of us in the hallway after the game, and he said, I don't want to get a divorce, and I already had to move Andrea to Rhode Island, and that was a struggle, and then we went to Connecticut. So I totally agree. And, you can see all you have to do is spend a couple days, minutes around that program. You can see how much influence Andrea has on him, how tight they are, how much of a partnership it is. Not just her, but the whole Hurley family, Melissa and Chris and Bob, they're all there. Andrea's bringing the mini washing machine and the dryer to do the dragon shorts. So they have a real partnership there. And, they deserve a lot of credit for talking about issues like mental health and a lot of, serious off the court issues that go beyond basketball. So, yeah, I don't see Dan at Kentucky. I think a lot of people agree with me. He's a Northeast guy. He's a Jersey guy. The Kentucky thing, you have to have a real, not that Dan doesn't have these qualities, but, you have to be prepared to deal with that whole BBN nation. And I think,
sure.
To John Calipari's credit, I think he decided, hey, it's time for me to move on. And he said in his video the other day that Kentucky needs a new voice. And it is kind of weird to see him in Arkansas red.
Yes.
So if Scott Drew does take this job, he's gonna be in the fishbowl with a lot of eyes and a million people following his every move at Kentucky, and they expect championships down there. Whereas at Waco, I think Scott Drew's got probably a pretty safe, cozy deal. He's won a championship. There can't be more than one or two beat writers down there covering the team. Whereas at Kentucky, he's going to have all these websites and newspapers. So, yeah, I don't think that was a fit for Dan. And look, money isn't everything. Obviously, it's very important. And all these Kentucky fans are just like, oh, we're going to throw 10, 11 million at Dan Hurley. He's going to come running. I don't think these people know who Dan Hurley is. They obviously didn't understand who he is. But, that said, I'm sure Connecticut is going to have to – I saw the governor made some comments yesterday that I pay for success. So they'll have to ante up and give Dan a raise.
For sure. And before we let you go, I think you mentioned to me that Scott Drew is in negotiations, or is that what's being reported right now? I know
I reported he's in negotiations. He's their top target. There was a lot going on yesterday with a private plane left from Texas to Lexington and came back with Scott Drew's family on it, the wife and the kids, not Scott. Scott sort of strategically tweeted out a picture of himself at a Mexican restaurant in Waco with a booster. So he kind of threw a little fake there that he was in Waco, but his family went to Lexington. So I think we're going to hear an answer, probably today, if not, tomorrow on what Scott Drew does. I know he has a good relationship with Mitch Barnhart, the AD. They're both Christians. They share a lot of values, faith values. If Scott Drew somehow says no, I'm not sure where Kentucky goes next, to be honest.
For sure. Well, listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV and free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now and available on the free Fire TV channels app. Adam Zagoria, thank you so much for coming on the show. Want to say to our fans and those who watch Locked On UConn, stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.